Real pleasure to be here. Paul and I go back a few years now. It's always great to talk to him, and it's also great to see you. It's great to see a number of names I've seen on Twitter and Blue Sky and wherever else. Now it's all fractionated. What I'm going to do today is take you to my first love, and that is, of course, the Great War. As I was saying to Paul, teaching my students about the First World War, and keep this to yourselves. I said to them, "Why are you doing this?" And they said, "Because it's the best war." Now, make of that what you will, but the thing is, I think it's most inspirational in many ways, most tragic, most fascinating, and for me, particularly being interested in material culture, it's full of stuff. So, what I'm going to do today is to take you through one of my favorite books that I've written, Tommy's War, and take you through and explain to you a little bit about the material culture of the war through the eyes of the soldier. So I'm going to share my screen with the slides. Hopefully this will give you some kind of insight to this. So let me just see if I can do that. Yeah, okay. So hopefully, whoops, I'm going to stop sharing because I'm sharing it right in the middle of the slides. So, you know, when the best laid plans go awry. Here we go. Let's start again. Right. So, what I'm going to do then is share the screen. Hopefully, yeah, we can see that now. Let's bring that up. You got a lot of tech. Uh, Fantastic. Right. So this is my book, Remembering Tommy. It was a collaboration between myself and Chris Foster. Chris is the originator of Craven's Part in the Great War, good friend of mine, fantastic photographer. And between the two of us, we came up with the idea of remembering the British soldier of the First World War through the use of the artifacts, but also the artifacts in place in historic locations. So we managed to work with a range of historic locations, many of them really happy to have us engage. Beamish, for example, Mr. Straw's house, Fort Nelson. These are, really important and significant locations. And, we also use Taft's trenches. So you'll see a lot of the images, a lot of the things in position. Now, the thing I want to explain to you is why we're doing this. As far as I'm concerned, this is what anthropologists refer to as the material culture of war. So the material culture really reflects those things that define a culture. That can be the buildings, it can be the objects, it can be the paintings, the sculpture, the pottery, and so on. And so what we're looking at are the artifacts which define a nation at war, and of course, nations at war. So really significant. Now, this photograph was something that was shared on Twitter many years ago, and I think in many ways personifies the British soldier, fully equipped with what arguably the best equipment carried by any soldier in the First World War. And again, you can see this is a man who has experience. It's a wonderful image, and there are lots and lots of images like this, images perhaps not as resonant of the soldier, but lots and lots of images. So really what I wanted to do was I've always felt strongly about working from the bottom up. I don't really get very much involved in whether Haig was a butcher or a bungler. He was just a guy doing his job, same as Tommy here. And I'm really interested in the culture of the ordinary soldier. So let's start with a couple of sort of significant artifacts. This, believe it or not, is a bath tile, and it was issued in 1914. It shows just how significant Kitchener was. Kitchener is a significant character, the most famous soldier, a man of gruff personality, blamed for many significant challenges in war, but also somebody who guided and supported the British into the realization of a war at least 3 years long, which would take millions of men. And so what happened, of course, was the idea in the opening days of the war from the British perspective, there was this call for arms. And the call for arms is not something that was just randomly thought up. It was actually thought up by a guy called Sir Hedley Butler Bass, a man who is probably seen as the father of advertising in the UK. And so this was a coordinated campaign with Kitchener driving this through to get as many men into the army Now, another inspiration for me are these sets of postcards. This was a postcard set by Fergus McCain. Fergus McCain is like many other soldier artists. He has a realistic and reasonable approach to his drawings. He also knows what he's talking about. So Burns' father is another. Burns' father, of course, his experience from the early part of the First World War, and so that resonated with him and with the public and remained in position right the way through the war. But I would argue, possibly sacrilegiously, that Fergus McCain's representation of the British soldier and the soldier at war is even more factually engaged. And the most important thing about McCain's drawings is that they were drawn in France, published in France, and sent home by soldiers from France, kind of like saying, "This is me." So you'll see these cards picking up right the way through this presentation. And what I've done is I've kind of mirrored the same rhythm. There were four parts of this: in training, at the base, up the line, and out on rest. And you're going to see that as we go through the objects. So on the one we've just seen, you will have seen and understood the pressure on the average person under Kitchener's campaign, which is, of course, the regular soldiers were already and reservists were already in the army. The territorials had been called to arms. They had, if they signed a commitment to do so. The remainder of men aged between 18 and 45 would be requested to join. And so the kind of imagery we see here, can you imagine? So the two tram tickets are from South London, show the staff that's in you join today, come and join and become a trained soldier. This was on your tram ticket. And this is not just in London. This is, you can see now, Colston Hall, now renamed, of course, in Bristol. Everywhere you went, there was this thrown at you, and of course, the fear of the white feather. I really find it fascinating that if you conjure up that image of what did you do in the Great War, Daddy, just think about the fact that children might be playing at Christmas time this game in front of their fathers, recruiting for Kitchener's army. It's really interesting. You start off with signing the pledge. That means no drink for you. You can see you end up somewhere in the Irish Sea if you did have a drink. You can see the significance of having good teeth. Defective teeth means you're not going to be fit for the army. And a good one here, not actually come to the realization of what this is. Smoker's heart. This is kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? So again, trying to get fitness from you. So a really interesting game of that period. So as you're walking down the street, you come across this. It's kind of interesting the way that's represented now in the Imperial War Museum and their wall perpetually moving, showing these kinds of posters, and those posters are dramatic. This is screaming out at the average person walking down that road. And I think some of the posters that came out from this are just incredible. This is actually a small poster in the form of a right arm. Lend your strong right arm to your country, enlist now. So these posters, something like 5 million posters produced by the Parliamentary Recruiting Committee. 5 million. These were produced in the period of active recruiting from late 1914 right the way up to the end of 1915. That's a lot of posters. So the kind of imagery that we look at, I've done another book with Chris called Kitchener's Mob, where we've looked at the growth and development of Kitchener's Mob. This is an image representing the recruiting drive. The idea, of course, that men joined in en masse right at the beginning of the war is not entirely true. And what's really interesting for us, if you want to spot the kind of demographics, you've got the white collars and the boaters, and you've got the chaps with their tweed jackets, hard wearing, and flat caps. So you can argue that there's an interesting mix of men. This is not the case in the PALS battalion, so we'll come on to that in a minute. This is Kitchener's Mob early on. So if you joined Kitchener's army, then of course, or any recruiting depot, you would have to take the oath. So when we did Kitchener's Mob, I was very sorry, Kitchener's Mob, and also Remembering Tommy, I was very keen that we really didn't get to see modern faces, even though many of the photographs of soldiers look incredibly modern. So that we did this in silhouette, a representation here in Beamish of taking the oath in front of the recruiting officer. And that oath, you can see here, the oath to take arms, to obey the orders of the king and of men below this. Do you know what? I've looked at this photograph many, many times, and I've only just realized this guy's got his thumbs up. Interesting. So there we are. Wow, how many times have I looked at this? But they are obviously taking the oath to be faithful to the king, to take orders from the generals, officers, and others. A very significant moment, and of course, earn their first shilling. So going to Beamish was quite spectacular. Beamish is, of course, a reconstructed village up in County Durham, and is an amazing place. The original Beamish was, in the way it was constructed, was to represent 1913, so absolutely just before the war. And what you see there is a range of different atmospheres. We had the opportunity to lay into this objects that we brought, including the beer, including the cap, the swagger stick, into this miner's cottage. It really, I don't know what it was, but incredibly atmospheric, the boots in the background as well. And that's what I like to do, is represent that and see how we reflect on that with images of the time. Now, as many people have pointed out, it's all very well for this guy from Manchester to try and pour his beer. It might be useful if he took the top out of his beer bottle, but it's a great picture nevertheless. And this the lad on the left here with the cap on the back of his head appears in a number of photographs. Clearly a Mancunian Jack the Lad here, and a corporal to boot. So when we look at the uniforms and equipment of these soldiers, and particularly Kitchener's Army, one of the interesting things is the differences that we see. And what I'll start off here with the Manchester Pals here in Kitchener Blue. The Pals battalions were not, they were actually designed entirely to attract what was referred to as the commercial classes. That meant that in one advert in the Liverpool Daily Press, it said that they had an amazing crush of men trying to join the Liverpool Pals, and there were no undesirables. You can read into that what you wish, but generally speaking, what the idea was to attract men who were engaged in commercial work, i.e. worked in offices, so they didn't have to do what we saw in the earlier photograph where we saw the mixture of men with flat caps and boaters. It really was a class-based system, which is fascinating to see. And because of that, in rich cities like Manchester, you know, they got the best possible Kitchener Blue uniform. It wasn't always like this, with the best possible badges and equipment. When we go on and look at the sort of idea behind volunteering, we also start to see this object, which is quite commonly found now. It's an armband or armlet, which is, or brassard, as it's really referred to, with obviously the red crown on the khaki background. This was to show that this was in the latter stage of recruiting after Lord Derby's taking over the recruiting department. And what he was able to do, or trying to do, was to shore up the decline in recruiting of volunteering by suggesting that men could join up but wouldn't be called up until they were needed. And so they were issued with this armlet, which again demonstrated that they were willing. They wouldn't get the white feather, but they would only go when required. So let's shift now to sketches from Tommy life in training. And I think, again, Fergus McCain is probably characterizing himself as, you know, how you feel. You think, look at these smart chaps in the background. Why the hell can't I tie my puttees? And what am I supposed to do with this jacket that's too short? And what do I do with all these bits and bobs? All the things which are lying around him are all parts of the kit, the necessaries which were issued, which is absolutely fascinating to try and reconstruct. Excuse me. So here we can see clearly a Kitchener's Army battalion in the making. You can see men of different statures, different clothing. They're all there doing their training. No weapons, just a roll of blanket around their shoulders. Transform that into the PALS battalions that just been describing. These are the Birmingham PALS, probably the best, well-equipped, well-uniformed. They had two uniforms. They were tailored in Kitchener blue. They had special badges, as of course you would expect from the city where badges are made. It was clearly different, cut above to be in the Birmingham Pals. Shows you how diverse and difficult it is sometimes to work out what's going on in these photographs, each one of them replete with lots and lots of information. So if you look at objects like this is obviously Gordon Highlanders, and what we can see here in this in this cap, we can see quite clearly in Glengarry cap. We can see the guy's identity discs, which are really interesting. We can see his shoulder titles. He's slightly moth-eared, Glengarry, and again the clear clarity of the Gordon Highlander soldier here in kilt and tunic is quite an incredible thing to see marching down the roads in France. If we go to the territorials, so here's one of the London territorial battalions. Again, young man here, clearly with the black buttons of that particular rifle battalion, and you can see why they'd be called the black button bastards, because they didn't have to polish those things, and they were really quite pleased with themselves about it. For the Leeds pals, you can see again the pride that the local community had in raising this commercial class, wearing as they do the cap badge of Leeds. The fact that these are so heavily collected and so widely sought after means that most of them on eBay and other auction sites, of course, are fake. This one isn't. You can tell that because the owls aren't thin, they're fat, and the owls don't have long, spindly legs. They have short, spindly legs. There you go. It's a clue for you if you need to find one. The thing about the British Army at that time is the huge numbers of men that were in the corps, such as the Royal Regiment Artillery, divided up, of course, into Royal Field Artillery, Royal Garrison Artillery, Royal Horse Artillery. The artillery was huge. I mean, immense. And so the large numbers of men were in this and the Army Service Corps. Many people who collect medals think, well, oh no, another Royal Field Artillery. That's the way they think in many ways, in some cases. And I can understand why there are so many of them. But the actual artillery and the driver in those artillery with the spurs and, of course, their bandolier equipment, again, really interesting. And this sergeant's uniform belonged to a man who was invalided out with dysentery of the army from Mesopotamia. So again, each item tells us a story. Now, I would argue, I think many would, that the British infantry equipment was the best. It distributed the weight appropriately across the body. It did not put everything on the belt. It carried things on the shoulders. It braced everything. This is the interior of the 1908 equipment. Of course, getting that webbing equipment was really quite difficult. So we can tell the difference between the regulars and perhaps even the territorials and the service battalions, that is Kitchener's Army, by the fact that the service battalions have this 1914 pattern leather equipment, discarded, disparaged after the war, perhaps reused for certain different types. It's rarer than the others. But again, wherever you see a picture like this young man wearing that pattern, you can guarantee, I think, or argue that that really distinctive pattern of equipment tells you that this was a Kitchener's man. Excuse me. That being said, some territorials, like this chap here, Asprey, this photograph was rescued from a dustbin by a friend of mine. Just goes to show how people disparage some things which have age. I still am shocked by that. I'm glad to say that Sir Private Asprey has appeared in a number of my books. And you can see in the territorials of the Cheshire Regiment, something close to where I'm from, back up in Birkenhead, this is a lad with serious intent in his face, again, with a long Lee Enfield rifle rather than the short magazine Lee Enfield that you see there on the left. So, even diversity in uniforms and equipment was found there. Now, there are plenty of people who know more about weapons than I do, and would argue the pros and cons of whether or not the short magazine Lee Enfield was the best or not. All I can tell you is I think it's the best, simply because of its an iconic status. And I think here this is the opportunity to break this down, to clean it, to engage with it, and the learning of the trade of that. We know, of course, don't we, that the war as it proceeded was not the war of the rifleman as such by the end of the war. It was the war of the hand grenade, the war of the trench club, and so we get to see that towards the end of the war. But certainly the legendary status of the short magazine Lee Enfield rifle places it up there, whatever other people may think. So these photographs are just terrific. You get many photographs. This is obviously of a artillery unit. We can see them posing with McConaughey and Bully Beef in front of the lads laying down. What you get in these photographs are the young ones, the older ones, the reticent ones, the cocky ones. The guy with the moustache is always the guy with the moustache. The fellow with the little quiff that sticks out under his cap. I mean, you may think I'm joking, but these actually do come out through many of the photographs, and it does always beggar the question, I wonder what happened to these lads. We can't help it. This is the sense that we have with the First World War. I know it is fashionable and probably factually correct to suggest that 12% of soldiers who went to war were the ones who died. The remainder, of course, came back. But we have to remember that not everybody went to the front line. Quite a number did not. Not everybody served in the front line. Quite a lot did not. And so when we're looking at the 12% who died, we're looking at a smaller percentage of the army who are actually serving in the most dangerous conditions. Artillerymen being one of them, of course. So if we move to the sort of camps, it's really interesting to realize just how spread these camps were. This is from Salisbury Plain in 1914, and then we shift to something like this. I don't know if you've ever been to Taff. Gilliam's Great War huts, but there's something approaching this. The order of this, you can see your face in the metalware there, and again, it's incredible to see the equipment lying around the walls there. Again, 1914 leather equipment, showing this is a Kitchener's Army hut. So obviously it behoved me for remembering Tommy to reconstruct that. So this is in Fort Nelson. The guys in Fort Nelson in an actual barrack. The guys in Fort Nelson really helpful, enabled us to do this and to set up the shots here in a barrack bed with all the equipment, the boots, the kit roll, the mess tins, the boot blacking, you name it, it was there. Excuse me, I'm going to have to take a glass of water. So it's really fascinating under pressure to try and replicate, excuse me, try and replicate what we see here. And it shows you the level of kit that was issued to the soldier. Of course, not many of those would end up in the front line. It would be slimmed down. So the mythology of the British soldier carrying so much kit they couldn't get out of the trenches really is probably overblown, to be honest. I particularly like the small kit because the small kit has this sense of being owned and used by an individual, and very rarely do you get complete ones. This is one that I put together. I do have one like this, which belonged to a Royal Marine artilleryman. That was used in my First World War and 100 Objects, who was killed in action in Jutland on HMS Lion. And again, very poignant in that survives with all his regimental numbers from the Royal Marine Artillery in there. These were used personally by soldiers. Again, there's something very distinctive about that. So let's move to the training. Again, we get the sense of the fact that these lads are not only training, but they're building themselves up. The food that was provided by the army authorities was wholesome and filling. It may not be the best in the world, but it did its job. And so a lot of men put weight on and actually built physical fitness. It's really interesting. This is arguably the first PALS battalion. I would possibly argue with that. It's one of the first three of Kitchener's armies. It was certainly the 10th Battalion, the Royal Fusiliers, the stockbrokers, which was really interesting to see them doing some field cooking there using Dixies in position. So, really fascinating to see those guys doing it. But I really love photographs like this showing the Kitchener's army men building themselves up. I get asked a lot, did these men get training? Of course they got training. They were in the UK for a large period of time, and they got training according to the manuals that were produced prior to the war. So engaging in these kind of physical activities, Swedish drill, the rest of it to build them up, did actually engage them in this activity. What I really do like, though, is Donald McGill. Now, McGill, of course, was not a military man, but he captured what was happening on the home front really spectacularly well, with absolute humour. So I love this. Recruits, orders of the day, 8 hours drill, 8 hours route marching, 8 hours trenching, and then we have the rest of the day ourselves. And it's really great when you get these and soldiers have sent them home to their parents or loved ones to say, oh, this is me. Again, the kind of punning here is, Kitchen's recruits. I'm not off picking up since you joined the army, picking up in strength, picking up in activity, but also just picking up loads of soil and stuff to dig my trenches. Again, it's a clever way of representing it. So the training I've already mentioned, that training was, of course, defined by the army manuals. It would go through the process of course, physical fitness, but you'd go through a range of other activities, including, of course, how to use your weapons. I particularly like this in that he's saying, there's on account of so many there to help you hit the bullseye. Can you imagine being under this pressure? You've got a lance corporal, you've got a staff sergeant, and you have got a first lieutenant, a lieutenant there in the background, just to make you hit that bullseye. It's funny. So it's really interesting to see images like this. So, again, Kitchener's army training with short magazine light Lee Enfield rifles. Again, these kind of pictures are out there, but quite rare to see, but it's sort of magnificent when you do see them. I think one of the things about training is I've never been a military man myself. I've never done this particular activity, but I have interviewed people who have done it. And the idea of making sure that you stick your bayonet into a sack is actually pretty terrifying because you know what the purpose of your weapon is. And I think it is always the last part of your training, a kind of coming of age in that way. There's also a hell of a lot of marching as these Gloucesters here are marching along the roads. So clearly marching was something that these men would have to do. And we get a lot of iconic images from the First World War of marching soldiers, as we'll see. So what we then see is that these men, of course, have moved over to France and we'll end up in Le Havre or other locations, Etaples, where clearly we're going to see the bull ring and also running up and down sand dunes. We also tried hard to kill ourselves, tearing mad up and down a lot of sand dunes, with a very helpful gentleman with a amber armband, a canary, pointing his way up there, very stiff in that sense. As you went over to the base, you would be issued with your field dressing, which would go into a pocket in the inner part of your tunic. Remembering, of course, that our field dressing would be intended for you. So dressing yourself, you would not dress another soldier with your own dressing. You would open their dressing and dress them. So they need to know where it was. This one from 1916. You'd also be asked to write in the back of your paybook the particular details of a will. And it came as a shock to me, actually, because these were released, I think, during the centenary of the Great War, so that by the Department of Pensions, so you could actually look to see whether a will had been made. And it came as a bit of a shock to me that my wife's great uncle, who was never forgotten, who died aged 18 in 1918, had in fact left a will, and to see his writing with something from this paybook was actually pretty powerful. You'd also be issued with your iron rations, so you would get some rather unappetizing looking biscuits, your bully beef, some tea, and other rations in this little pouch. So again, you would carry that. You were not allowed to eat or drink from that without an officer's permission. Nevertheless, as you can see, as men were going in their classic Om 40 Chevaux 8, along the way, at walking pace, you would have children requiring or asking for souvenirs, your buttons and what have you, but also bully beef, biscuit, and again, they would be perhaps taking a risk by giving them their iron rations. Now, it's amazing to see, isn't it, that London omnibuses would be used in the fields of Flanders and France. So incredible. This one of these was restored, I think, again during the centenary period and toured around. So really amazing to see that. And of course, where they would end up would be a city that I think we probably all know well. The Cloth Hall, the idea of Ypres in ruins is just incredible. Imagine as men moved through from Popering all the way along the road, Vlamertinghe, Brandhoek, through the way through into Ypres and through the Menin Gate, was just what they imagined. So images like this, photographs like this, are always powerful pieces of ephemera. And I think you can see what happens then to McCain's drawings as he starts to take away from the absolutely humorous to something foreboding. And these are the most significant postcards in many ways, because what is happening is they're being sold in France to soldiers, and under a wrapper that says, tell them, show them at home what you're feeling, or show them at home what you're experiencing. So a lot of these postcards have, I'm in the pink, hope you are too. The weather here is bad. Give my best to Aunt Sally. And they're on the front, they're showing this image, which is kind of depressing, showing these wintry trees. And of course, how else could you help define and identify the mud here? As you know, this is an infantryman's or a mounted soldier's boots, don't you? Well, again, I didn't up until I was researching for this. The infantryman ties his puttees with the tapes at the top, the mounted soldier with the tapes at the bottom. So there you go. Just a little clue for you. If you've ever been to the Tommy Cafe in Pozières, it's an absolute gift for anybody who wants to take photographs. And again, I think it's really significant that these screw pickets here, which are so iconic of the Great War, up here in such abundance. And I think wherever we see them, I know that Paul has taken photographs of these. I certainly do. Many of you probably do on the call. They just draw the eye when you want to take a photograph. So McCain is, again, accurate on this. This is, again, showing what it's like. And I explain to my students, imagine this, you're coming into the trenches for the first time, you're walking in there, you're apprehensive, you've no idea where you are, it's dark. But also, you're probably unaware of the pitfalls, that you've fallen into a hole, you've got into a sump, or you haven't kept your head down. It's really, really tragic, the amount of men who lost their lives through just maybe careless putting their head above the parapet, or the fact that the parapet had crumbled at that one point. So trench signs are very, very significant, very rare. This is a replica, of course. They occur and not very often, but they are always redolent in this. You know what this is telling you to the front line. And I think when you see reconstructed trenches like these ones, Taft Gillingham's trenches near Ipswich, again, used in many film sets, you can't help but sort of engage yourself with this. And you can rest assured that we use this entirely for placing our objects in position. So McCain again showing his command of his subject, the fact that he has a cover over his breech and also the muzzle of his rifle. Uh, he has his gas mask or PH helmet there in his satchel, and he has a again a duckboard. And if you look carefully, the duckboard reduces in size from the right to the left in terms of the boards, so they can fit together. This is something, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know, but there is again being represented by a master. So here we obviously duckboards become really significant on these tracks across the blasted landscape of Flanders. We tend to think of the war in this way, and of course, understandably so. But beyond this, with the green fields, and it wasn't always like this. And what we see is that the Royal Engineers, these are Australians, of course, but the Royal Engineers would be working to try and bring this back into some kind of habitable location with trench signs, duckboards, and the rest. I think the idea of the trenches and this constant bombardment, and spent bullets flying over is something that we can't understand. Perhaps what it was like. Maybe some of you can understand it. Maybe some of you have experienced this. I have not, but it is absolutely dramatic and also significant to imagine what it was like. We know, of course, don't we, that the trench life was, yes, the men during the day were in those trenches, sleeping wherever possible. If you look at panoramic photographs of the trenches during the time, you'll see, during the day, you'll see not much happening. But at night, everything comes alive, and particularly important, of course, is the very pistol, which is firing a round into the air, flare into the air, which would light the sky. This is really important to try and dominate no man's land. And of course, both sides use these. So these were constantly screaming out over no man's land. This is our reconstruction of, famous image of this happening. And you can imagine, can't you, just how it must have been to be trapped out in no man's land, to stay stock still and to hope against hope that you weren't going to be noticed. Now, this is a great picture showing again Australian soldiers, particularly like the gentleman with the pencil moustache. But it also shows you that as the war progressed, so what we have here is the need, the desire to get underground. Of course, it's really funny in a way to think about the way the British viewed the German approach to digging deep dugouts in advance of the Battle of the Somme, almost as if it was a dastardly act. It's the most sensible act if you are hoping to hold your enemy on a defensive. And so it was only as the latter part of the war do we see these constructions. And this, of course, is in the salient. We can tell that because of the use of railway beams at the top, I-beams. We can see the great big trees and so on. This is an incredible image of a dugout system. So again, we wanted to try and capture that, this sense of not only the dugout system, but the officers' dugout with the sort of Kirshner ladies, putties, sandwiches, you name it, being put out here, officers, torches, everything there to demonstrate and to reflect on what it must have felt like as those bombardments were taking place outside. One thing that we were also fascinated with is this day-to-day life, because many people think, well, they had a forebear that was killed in the war. What battle did he die in? And I would argue perhaps that many of these men would may never have taken place in a major battle, but they certainly risked death by looking through a loophole or by putting their head above the parapet or by just a chance spent bullet. And there's this really significant image from, I think, the Great War. I was there, or one of those, showing again this loophole and the action of a sniper with the sort of chalked on number of Huns that had been taken out by that kind of brutality of the Great War. I really like this image. I think again it is really rich in detail. The guy that's looking out from the dugout, the soldier looking upwards with a whistle in hand. He has, again, his pH phenohexamine gas helmet in his satchel, his leather equipment. He's looking up carefully. He's looking at a mirror on a little branch here, could equally be a bayonet. And what he's looking for are trench mortars, blowing the whistle. So the whistle wasn't just used for going over the top, it was for warning men of the coming of the flying pigs, of barrels, of all manner of different things that they referred to, but basically minimum warfare shells as they came over the parapet. So what we're looking at is just how this war becomes a war of the trenches, how you sit in those trenches, how you spend most of your time in the trenches. It's hardly surprising how terrifying it must have been to have gone over the bags, as they refer to, or over the top. And so the idea of the trench mirror there, you can see attached to the bayonet, or the number 9, I think it is, trench um, periscope, which again is a very iconic image seen in, often used in, again, the film 1917. And again, these postcards show exactly what this is about. This guy is not going to put his head above the parapet, even though he has his steel helmet. War Office pattern. Brodie's patent was the liner, and it was really never called a Brodie during the First World War, as far as I understand from research. But in any case, this guy would be in real difficulty if he stuck his head above the parapet. So again, he's standing guard using this, again, box periscope. So I've mentioned to you the war was a war by the end. It was a war not necessarily of the rifle and the rifleman, but actually of the grenade bomb, as it would be referred to at the time. So here we can see bombs in position in a sap, extended out into no man's land. You can see the water bottle to give the observation. There you can see the Mills bombs with their primers, and you can see the PH helmet ready to go if required. Obviously, gas went from from something which was terrifying to something which could be combated relatively straightforwardly by the PH helmet. This is one of those. You can see the goggle-eyed bugger with the tit, was it called? Robert Graves' famous book. And you can see why. How difficult that would have been to have breathed in through that chemically inundated bag, and also to breathe out through the sort of flutter valve at the front is really difficult. Impregnated is the word I was trying to call it to. COVID really gets the brain. On the left, of course, we can see as the war progressed, the use of warning rattles, of shell cases hung up, and of course a small box respirator, which would give total protection. So the Germans and the British would use clever activities such as firing gas shells containing what they call lacrimatory gas, i.e. tear gas, to make men want to take their mask off. And once they've done that, then they throw in mustard gas shells. It becomes a tactical weapon, a weapon of not necessarily of mass destruction, but one which would wreak havoc on other batteries. So what about food in the trenches? Well, I work now in Goldsmiths University in London, just minutes away really from the place where the rum jars were filled in Deptford Creek. And so we can obviously see a rum jar that would have water in that sometimes as well, the bully beef, the bread, plum and apple jam. Of course, why would you not have plum and apple jam in a trench? And of course, all the paraphernalia. Each man in a trench was expected to remain clean, and so using tea to shave with, or very small amounts of water. Again, using your small kit was expected. Again, this is reconstructed here in a trench. What would happen though is, again, as represented by Fergus McCain, is If your trench was a soggy mess like this one, then and you dropped your rifle in there, because not only do you have to keep yourself clean, you have to keep your rifle clean, otherwise it would misfire or not fire at all. This would be a major, major issue for those soldiers. So it's really fascinating for us to try and reconstruct life in a relatively quiet trench using a brazier and one of those Dixies that you saw. So yeah, we cooked up some stew, believe it or not. Appetizing as it looked, we also served it out and ate it. So I'm still alive today, so showed you that that was not too bad an experience. I once worked with a young man in Antarctica, of all places. His name was McConaughey, believe it or not, and his family were the ones that supplied the McConaughey to the troops. So McConaughey was something like this, which was a stew which had vegetables in it. So that was really fascinating to come across that. And what I love about this, about McCain, I've probably bigged him up quite a lot. But you can see the detail in here. See his clasp knife. You can see his biscuit, his jam. You can see him drinking or eating stew from his mess tin. How amazing is that? So, we also have to think about the battles and the context of those battles. So this is Mr. Straw's house, and this hall stand was an absolute gift to us. So we only had a morning to photograph there. So I laid this Daily Mirror contemporary, a set of letters, a letter opener, and of course a an inkwell made from a shell, just as you might get in homes up and down the country. So the Battle of the Somme has been argued about, discussed. I'm sure you've discussed it at length with Paul and listened to what Paul has to say. Very respected author and interpreter of the Great War is Paul. And whichever way we look at this is, however we view the war and however we see it as a war where the British Army learned its trade throughout, we cannot escape the loss of life on that first day and the first hour. So although we like to look beyond that, we try to put it into context, I think there is some defining moment, and it explains probably why during the centenary that moment was commemorated by that sort of vigil in the Westminster Abbey, and I was really grateful to be there. And in that, there are icons: the icon of the trench watch, the Webley, and the whistle. And I think we cannot get that out of our minds. If we've built a life in the trenches, a kind of bizarre domesticity, that material culture of a life in the trenches, going about your business, and yet you're going to have to go over the top once that whistle is blown. It's just terrifying. And the thing about this is that while we speak, trench warfare is live and active in the Ukraine right now. And again, it is really difficult for us to try and understand what it must be like for those men and women. So over the top, on the first day of the Battle of Somme, that those ideas of trench ladders, of rifles with wire cutting equipment attached to them, and of walking towards the line. It's so iconic, and it will always resonate with us. It is our duty, everybody here on this call who's interested in the Great War, to understand that, to try and interpret it, and to help people to understand much about that war. So yeah, the good thing about this image is it doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it says it is. It's practicing an attack, but the actual energy in this is just incredible. The Daily Mail war pictures that were important. The Daily Mail, I think, paid £50,000 for the opportunity to publish the official photographs in these, I think, set of 155 or something like that. Postcards are really, really significant and important. They're common, but I think they really gathering a collection shows you what the British people were understanding about the war. This is representative of a set of souvenirs, and the number one souvenir of anybody going over the top, of course, is going to be one of these pickle halberds, or a helm which spits, or leather helm, just you can call it whatever you wish. The thing about this, as I was explaining to two schools from across London a few weeks ago, is if you look at this helmet, you look at that eagle, mit Gott for König und Vaterland, with God for king and country. The kind of resonance of the fact that these Prussian soldiers or soldiers wearing the Prussian eagle are carrying the same message as those men from other countries fighting for king and country or for la patrie. You know, it is always about these grand ideas, but it does come down to boots on the ground. And so souvenirs would consist of this, but also buttons, the belt buckle with Gott mit uns, God with us, the shoulder strap showing the regimental numbers, and of course the Feldmutz, this little pork pie cap here, given, of course, to a Prussian soldier because of the cockades. Lots of these were captured in trench raids, and this image is fascinating. Whenever I come across original press photographs from the time, actually prints, I buy them if I can. And this one is one of the most brutal ones I think that I have. It shows exactly what has happened here. You look in depth, you can see in the background, you can see other German prisoners of war. You can see a French cinematographer, you can see French officers, you can see British soldiers, and you can see this regimental policeman here with his armband or brassard leading this badly wounded or beaten German soldier to the rear, I guess, for interrogation. If you've ever went to the Imperial War Museum in its previous incarnation, you would have come across the trench experience, and right at the end of that trench experience was a representation of this soldier, and it never failed to affect me as I went through that. That was an incredible piece of museology, sadly lost today. So one things that we are, really fascinated with, I think, is this business of the business of stretcher bearing in the First World War. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about who was a stretcher bearer. Men who carried the brassard SB were stretcher bearers, regimental stretcher bearers. They were men who were trained as infantrymen. They did not carry the rifle. They carried only the stretcher and this armband. They did not have the protection of the Geneva Red Cross, but they went over into no man's land to bring back the men who had taken part in that particular battle. I think this is some level of bravery. Those men who wore the brassard and the Geneva Cross, of course, also did their part, and those were men with the Royal Army Medical Corps who were in the aid stations and who gave succor to the wounded. Men who were wounded, like this gentleman, got the gunshot wound to the neck, severe, and this kind of thing would be tied onto the uniform, and all their personal effects would, of course, be bagged up so that they would be sent back. Perhaps unfairly, the Royal Army Medical Corps were referred to, and I have that in a letter from a soldier, as Rob or my comrades. Again, I think that's probably harsh banter amongst soldiers, but even so, it shows you the concerns that soldiers had. So if we've gone from the front line, the life in the front line, the idea of the trench life, the context of the battle and the going over the top and the trench architecture, there was another side to this, which is you came out on rest. And again, this is showing once again the humour, the very similar humour amongst Burns' father. At present, we are staying at a farm whilst everything around him was destruction. This one is saying it looks rather pretty to see a picture of us at dinner, realising that many of the Flanders farms actually had a big pile of dung in the middle of that, a midden heap. So maybe that's what we're experiencing here. Nevertheless, these men are out of the line, are able to feed up. They were also issued with money. So the pay book, you can see in the field here, being issued quite often with 5 franc notes, excuse me, to do with what they wished for, so that could be on obviously egg and chips, it could be on booze, it could be on women who are willing to give their services for payment. It could be the most sentimental soldiers would buy postcards to be sent home, particularly silk postcards. It's a fascinating thing to think about. What is it that those soldiers were doing? Some of them, of course, would send them home. Many, although forbidden, would use them to gamble with. And so this is a crown and anchor board of the time. Again, I'm using a captured Felmutz here to keep money. Obviously, this is in the UK, but similarly, things will be set up in there. So these were rolled up. Basically, you lost. I think it's a straightforward answer. So the people who own the board would, of course, be making the most money. But this is an image which is commonly come across in many memoirs. The idea of, a doughty family who are able to put up soldiers who serve them hot coffee, cafe au lait, for example, fried eggs and chips. This is the staple. This is all that a soldier could require. And again, McCain is picking out the detail. By the way, McCain was in the Sportsman's Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers. That's why he's got RF on the shoulder titles here. This is semi-autobiographical in his sake. And they're still carrying that PH helmet satchel because the still in this zone was gas possibility. On rest, you could not rest forever. You had to make sure your rifle was fit for use. So the pull through and the oil bottle and use of toothbrush is important. But also you would, be able to use trench mirrors to shave, to clean yourself up. And again, if you look carefully, you'll notice that McCain has reconstructed a trophy belt. These are often called hate belts for no reason that I can understand, as most of these were using cap badges from friendly regiments. So I prefer trophy belt. Boots had to be cleaned, and of course, this meant having cleaned them. If they, what the intention was that you would make sure you had enough dubbing in them to soak up into the leather, and of course to become waterproof. Buttons had to be shined, unless you were one of the black button bastards, using a button brass like this one, or a button stick, soldier's friend, and so on. And of course, you would do repairs on your uniform as well, using your housewife, or hussif, as it was referred to. I got my friend Chris Foster to have a go at trench shot. He vowed never to do that again. This was his attempt. I think it gave him a real pain in the arm, but it shows you that could be done. Filled with lead. This is the Cameroonian Scottish Rifles cap badge here, using a variety of dyes. Most of this, of course, would be done by men with access to equipment. So those men who had been wounded would end up in base hospitals or stationary hospitals. This one is at Le Treport. And the really important thing about this image is the diversity of the men here. You'll see diverse faces in this. These are men, black soldiers in county regiments, amongst Australians, Brits, New Zealanders, you name it. They're all here. All of them, most of them anyway, wearing Kitchener blue. Hospital blue, of course, which is really important. So hospital blue is the badge of the wounded soldier. It was baggy. It was laundry in a hospital. It was reissued to every soldier that came through. They were worn with a red tie, white shirt, and bright blue jacket. It would often wash out into a lighter color, as well as the particular headgear of the soldier. So this, if you were able to walk down the street with this on, of course, you were fated as the soldier hero. And so it's hardly surprising that there were a range of these flag days. Our day referred to, you can see, for wounded soldiers and sailors, you put some coppers into a tin and you would get a little flag. And of course, that would help and assist soldiers in hospitals like this. This is clearly in some, probably anyway, in some stately home somewhere, given over to the care of soldiers. I think if we then shift off into Home and Remembrance, I did a second edition of my book with Chris for the end of the centenary. And I think what's important to remember that coming home was and being demobilized was a really significant thing. Many men had to wait some significant time for this. So I think it's really interesting to go to Beamish and to imagine just what it was like. So here we've got an Ordnance Corps soldier at his doorstep, and here a similar doorstep in Beamish with that sort of symbolic return back from the front. Many of those men, of course, did not return home, and so it was down to the Graves Registration Unit and also the Imperial War Graves Commission to try and make sure that those people who could not get to visit their sons' graves, either because it was during the war or because after the war they had no visible means to get there, they would send an image of those. And so there's a really interesting book about photographing these war graves for the people at home. And of course, what's really important and significant about this is these are all replaced by the stone headstones that we see today, but they're a poignant reminder of the loss. We're also reminded of those photographs that were taken. This is the young man who was killed in action, aged 18, that I referred to my wife's great uncle. And again, frames like this reflect on the loss of men that young. Nevertheless, the war was of great interest, and so battlefield touring and the growth of battlefield, tourism as well as tourism in general was born in the interwar years. So I think Paul's antecedents go back to 1919, maybe even 1918, who knows, but probably 1919 is when that's happening. And so idea of engaging with that and guidebooks and the Immortal Salient produced for various organizations really important. And so those organizations like Comrades of the Great War, remembering life as it was in the First World War, remembering what it was to serve amongst soldiers and not to forget those men who were left behind. And I think it's really, this is from, I think, the Great War. I was there. It's an absolutely phenomenal image showing again why it is that people continue to buy with their own conscience the poppies. This is an original poppy from 1921, by the way, in the corner here. I know why I wear the poppy, for no political reason, but for just the reason of remembering those men who lost their lives. So I mentioned just how significant marching was and how these Daily Mail postcards are important. This is obviously a shot from the film The Battle of the Somme, which is rightly considered to be one of the world's most important artifacts. And I think the fact that these men looking back over their shoulders, grinning and waving is just terrifying when we think what happens as men walked in and across no man's land as these men at the Tyneside Brigade at La Boisselle, an actual shot of men in action on the Battle of the Somme. I say the Battle of the Somme still has its resonance even today, and much argued, but still significant. So just to finish off, I think, is why do we remember? Well, we have to remember those who fell, those who returned. And I think that's what all of us who are fascinated in our day-to-day lives with the Great War and through interpreters like Paul, who we're very lucky to have. So we will remember them, I think is a really important message. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Naturally, I'll take any questions you like. And whether I can answer them is another question.